Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. It's been a while, it's been a minute, but we're back. Obviously, Cage Warriors hasn't had a card in 2023, so this is actually the first one that we really get to talk about. And it's it's a card. It's definitely an MMA card. It's definitely a Cage Warriors card. Is it a good card? Probably not, but it's a funny card. And we're going to have a lot of fun talking about these fights because there's a lot of meme potential in this. There's a lot of little humorous tidbits and moments of fun. So I guess let's get into it. So, first and foremost, I'm completely uncertain of the bout order for this card. Cage Warriors' website has it all over the place. Tapology has a bout order that kind of makes sense, or at least a bit more than the actual Cage Warriors website. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the Tapology order. We're going to go through it fight by fight. I'm not going to lie. I don't know who some of these fighters are, but I've done some research ish, and I found a bunch of funny shit. So might not get much of a technical breakdown here, but we might get some good humorous moments. So I guess we should start with what appears to be the main event. Again, I'm not sure, so I'm going off Tapology order, but Tapology tells me Robert Hernandez versus John the Jesus is the main event. Quite like Roberto Hernandez as a featherweight prospect in this Cage Warriors San Diego scene. He's been really impressive since joining Cage Warriors. He won 3 times last year, had a really nice heel hook finish earlier in 2022. And he's quite dominant on the ground. If you haven't seen him fight, he, manages to get his fights there with ease. He's got good. I wouldn't say he's got great wrestling, but he's one of those fighters that just knows how to get the fight to the mat. He isn't someone who prioritizes control or position. It really is if he gets you down, he's going to bash your face in, or he's going to find a way to snatch your neck or snatch your ankle or something and find a way to get his finish. He is a prospect. He's a little bit older for a prospect. He's 29, I believe, so it's not like he's super young. But look, at 5-1, obviously, one of the better guys in this kind of San Diego scene that Cage Warriors have built up. If you kind of want to see a highlight of his, or if you want to get to know what kind of fighter he is or who he is, I would say go watch the Ethan Ewing fight at Cage Warriors 133. It's where he gets a really nice heel hook finish. That's probably where, if you want to familiarize yourself with his game, you could probably go through there. But I guess you could also watch all of his fights. They're all accessible on YouTube or on Fight Pass, and most of them don't go past the first round, so it wouldn't take you very long. John the Jesus is definitely an interesting fighter. Most people listening to this have probably watched him, whether you can remember or not. You've probably watched him at some point. He's fought in Bellator, he's fought in LFA, and he's also fought some high level fighters. I mean, he's fought Aaron Pico, Bill Algeo, Pat Sabatini, Billy Quarantillo, Kai Kamaka. So he definitely has a pedigree. He's also lost all of those fights against those fighters I just mentioned, so he's obviously not very good. He's 15-10, definitely, a veteran in the MMA game, and actually the most experienced fighter that Roberto Hernandez has ever fought. So I think it's a good test for Roberto Hernandez. He's usually been fighting guys who are like 3-1, 2-1, 1-1, 4-1. So, having someone he's 15-10, he's, I believe, 34 or 35 years old, a veteran who has fought some of the better kind of 145ers in the US. Algeo, Sabatini, Billy Q are all in the UFC, and obviously Aaron Pico, as we know, one of the better 145ers in Bellator. Obviously, John the Jesus definitely has kind of a more polished game, I guess. I just don't. I really just think Hernandez is far too slick on the ground as a submission artist, carries more than enough power, and the Jesus will probably succumb to a fairly early finish. I don't think he will survive against Roberto Hernandez. 5 of his 10 losses have come via finish, and I think Hernandez is probably well placed to add to his misery. Hernandez is one of the cooler kind of Cage Warriors San Diego prospects. There's a bunch of like really cool names, and he's definitely up there as one of the better ones. If he wins on the night, for me, I'd love to see him against a European talent at 145 pounds here. There probably isn't much left for him in the California scene. And I don't want to get to the point where we're wasting these talents on these San Diego cards. if you followed me for a while on my usual kind of Twitter, then you'll know my thoughts on these San Diego cards, and I'll probably go into it a bit, kind of, in deeper context throughout the entirety of this episode. But I definitely have some thoughts about it. They're not very positive. But when we do have these talents, like Chase and Blair, Roberto Hernandez, once they've won a few times in the San Diego scene, let's get them over to Europe. Let's get them fighting better fighters. Let's get them fighting people who will actually test them, who will allow us to kind of see, what level they're at. I want to see Roberto Hernandez against better 145ers. I think John the Jesus, good test. If he wins this, just put him in Europe, put him on the European cards. Don't, want to keep seeing him on these San Diego cards against, guys who are totally irrelevant, basically. For like, I know that sounds harsh, but it is what it is, right? So moving on, we've got Wilson Hayes versus Ricky Camp. Wilson Hayes, most of you listening to this probably know him as former UFC title challenger, fought Cejudo, fought Mighty Mouse. He's 2-0 in Cage Warriors since returning to the promotion, all of those last year. If you listen to the Cage Warriors 148 recap episode that I recorded, you would have heard me wax lyrical about him against Thomas Gronval. Gronval was obviously the pretty big betting favorite due to his perceived advantage in wrestling, and Hayes kind of took him to school. There were a lot of slick grappling exchanges, but Hayes totally dominated him from bell to bell. Really, really, dominant grappling, amazing in top control. Had a few submission attempts, had a few ground and pounds. I couldn't actually get the finish, but completely blanketed Gronval. And I think Hayes is now at this point in his career where you feed your prospects to him. If they lose, and most of the time they will, right? Ricky Camp, his opponent. Camp's an interesting fighter, a lot younger than Hayes. Naturally far less experience, of course. However, he hasn't lost a fight since 2016. That's, going on 7 years now. He's fought all over the world. He was supposed to fight Kenta Takizawa in Pancrase, but he's also fought in New Zealand, and he's also fought in the US and all over the place, right? So this guy's definitely got a varied background in terms of miles traveled around the world. But, having watched some of his fights, he's got a really nice submission game, good at attacking the neck. He's got a few rear naked chokes, some guillotines. He's definitely someone who, he has a good feel for when an opponent has their neck out, and he's really good at attacking it, but generally kind of butters his bread on the feet. He's a decent enough striker, has a bit of power, nice kind of rangy for 135. He's a pretty good fighter, but for me, Hayes is the focus in this fight. He's a guy who might even be in with a shout for contending, for Cage Warriors Gold at some point this year if he just keeps racking up wins. You can't deny him at this point. He's a really, really attractive name to have on your record if you're an up-and-coming 135er. So, you put him in there against, God, I don't know, someone like Loughran maybe, or a different kind of 135er, just to test where they're at. And also, you could throw Hayes into a title match just so you build up a guy who can go to the UFC and say, look, this guy just beat a former UFC title challenger. So I think there's definitely some benefits for Cage Warriors having Hayes on the roster. And, for me personally, I love this type of fighter, these old dogs, these aging grinders who kind of bully their way to victory against younger and more athletic competition. I suspect Hayes will probably win a comfortable decision. And like I said, insert himself into the title conversation at some point this year. Camp doesn't look to be very good off his back. Hayes is an aggressor, has enough of a gas tank, and can repeatedly ground Camp if he wants to and if he has to. And I think despite the mileage on Hayes, his chin is good enough to eat a few strikes if he has to against Camp. So, for me, this looks like not a layup for Hayes because, he is old and Father Time will catch up with him sooner or later. You could argue that it already has, and he's just fighting at his level now. But I just can't see Ricky Camp getting a victory over Wilson Hayes. So for me, Hayes probably wins a very, very comfortable decision. Moving on, and this is where the card gets fairly funny for me. If you followed me, I've got a very kind of cynical look at MMA, and I do like to poke some fun and take some stabs at MMA and just the funniness of it and the sheer absurdity of it. So Damon Wilson versus Sean Johnson. Anyone who's listened to me for a while, who's followed me on socials, you'll know I rate Damon Wilson pretty highly. He's a firefighter. He's got great power, got a really, really nasty left hook. Really powerful guy. Had a great fight with Tobias Harila last year, which I also discussed on the pod. Harila's a demon. in the cage, and it's no shame for Damon Wilson, who was 5-0 at the time, to take his first L against a guy in Tobias Harila, who's one of the better 145ers in Europe. Definitely a dangerous guy who could knock out anyone on his day. Damon Wilson was supposed to fight Motaz Askar. Askar is still on Tapology deemed to be the guy who's fighting Damon Wilson. That's not the case. A guy by the name of Sean Johnson has stepped in to fight Damon Wilson. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't know much about Sean Johnson, but a Tapology search told me that his nickname, and wait for it, is the Brutal Noodle. I don't know what that's referring to. I've watched some of his highlights. He doesn't look very brutal, and I don't know where the noodle comes from. Probably something that I'd love to actually sit down and ask this man. Why is your nickname the Brutal Noodle, sir? Please explain, because I have no fucking clue. So yeah, contender for best and worst nickname of 2023, probably the Brutal Noodle, right? But we've got another weird nickname on this card, which I'll get to. Back to the fight before I start memeing too much. As much as I love seeing Cage Warriors traverse the seas and visit other countries, the matchmaking in these San Diego cards is a little unfortunate. And that's the theme of this card, and you'll see it now as we burn through the rest of the fights, because they will get less and less interesting. I'm not one to rag on Cage Warriors. I'm literally the guy who has probably the only podcast in the world that's solely focused on covering Cage Warriors, right? So clearly I have a passion and an adoration for UK MMA and for what this promotion has done for European fighters. But there's obviously a model in place to build talent, put on exciting cards in general. But for me, this one's way too weak. And this Cage Warriors card, it's only 7 fights. I don't know what we're doing here. There's a few talented fighters. I'd probably say there's 2 talented fighters on this card, Roberto Hernandez and Damon Wilson, and then you've got an interesting fighter in Wilson Hayes, who's obviously a veteran. But other than that, there isn't any kind of great fighters on this card or prospects, right? Like there isn't anything that really stands out, which is why this is probably going to be a shorter episode than usual. Wilson's a really fine product of this Cage Warriors San Diego scene. He was undefeated until he ran into Harila, and like I said, there's no shame in losing to someone like Harila. Wilson's very exciting. He has that kill or be killed attitude that makes him fun to watch, whether he's the hammer or the nail. Aside from his debut in 2018, he's yet to see the judges' scorecards, so all 5 of his Cage Warriors fights have ended either in a first round or second round finish. He carries power in all of his shots, strikes in combination really well, and has that really nice left hook, really solid jab. He's just an aggressor, right? He's someone who's going to go there, put the fucking pace on you, and just hope to knock you out very early on. Sean Johnson, guys, not much to say with this man. He's 3-3 as a pro. He's likely there to get battered. Combined record of the 3 fighters he's beaten is 5-19, and one of those guys has won 4 of those 5 fights. So you can see kind of the caliber of fighter we have here. All of his losses have been in the first round. He's had 1 decision win, so he's very much a warm body for Damon Wilson to style on. And I'm not really going to spend too much time talking about this fight because it's very clear that it's just going to be a Damon Wilson highlight reel, right? All right, moving on. We've got Jamie Lynch versus Guilherme Santos. Jamie Lynch is another one of those Cage Warriors San Diego products, a guy who was brought on board as a genuine potential talent, and it's gone okay for him, I guess. He's 3-2 in the promotion. He beat Nakagawa, who we'll talk about later on in this card. He beat Albert Lee and Cesar Gonzalez. These aren't big names, but they're names that have been in and around this San Diego scene that Cage Warriors have built up. But his losses to Richie Miranda and Eric Sanchez were definitely disappointing and have probably pointed to us not seeing him as much of a prospect as he probably could have been. There was a bit of hype around this guy when he first came through the scene last year, but Eric Sanchez flatlined him pretty badly, and Eric Sanchez was the underdog in that fight. Guilherme Santos is an LFA vet, and I'm throwing air quotes right now. He's a veteran by virtue of the fact he's fought there twice, lost by knockout twice to future UFC fighters Bruno Souza and Camuela Kirk. He hasn't fought since then, so it's been 2 whole years since Guilherme Santos last fought. Not sure where his chin is at. He's still young. I think he's 25, trains at American Top Team, so obviously a decent enough pedigree of coaching and some good bodies to train with. This is where this card gets hilarious to me, and we can let the memes flow. 3 of this man's wins are against fighters with a record of, wait for it, NA. Let's hope Sherdog don't do a deep dive on this man. I think Jamie Lynch will probably be able to get his hands on Santos early and crack that chin. I think 2 years away from the cage is a long time, and only the best of fighters can really make that look like a non-factor. And I don't think Guilherme Santos is good enough. I think 2 years, it will definitely show. Jamie Lynch will probably, like I said, get his hands on him early, test that chin, and we'll probably see Jamie Lynch hopefully start to push towards being a more respectable prospect, because I think he's definitely lost some traction in the last year or so. All right, next up is Bill Wilson versus Obadiah Johnson. This is the who the fuck knows what will happen portion of the card. Both these men definitely exist. I can tell you that they do. I've done some Googling. Both of them have a tantalizing record of 1-1. In fairness to Bill Wilson, he had a pretty decent amateur career, looked pretty good in his pro debut against Albert Lee, where he finished Lee via ground and pound, and then he ran into Matt Hampton and lost fairly convincingly. Still not sure what type of fighter he is and where he excels best, and I'm afraid to report that I know nothing about Obadiah Johnson. I guess this card will be my opportunity to learn about him if I'm not being a little cynical bastard. But this is the first time he's fighting someone who isn't debuting in MMA, so I guess that's cool. If you're someone who listens to this pod for whatever reason to find betting picks and sneaky picks to make some money, one, you're in the wrong place, and two, please know that I know nothing generally in life, but especially when it comes to Bill Wilson versus Obadiah Johnson. So I'm going to move on and stop talking about this fight. All right, we're almost there, guys. And if you're still listening to this, bless you. You are an angel. We have Joshua Nakagawa versus Blake Perry. I actually have some cool stuff to say about this fight because I'm actually very much aware of who Blake Perry is and actually have been following him for a while. Blake Perry, despite being 1-1, has had one hell of a memorable career in MMA so far. If you're listening to this, you might not know who he is, but once I tell you the stuff that he's done in his MMA career, you're probably going to be like, oh shit, that's the guy. So early last year, he fought Makoa Cooper at Bellator 278 in Hawaii. So Cooper's a Hawaii state national champion in wrestling, young, undefeated, and Blake Perry was a massive plus 650 underdog. I'm not a betting guy, but plus 650 is, very sizable. Perry was supposed to go in there, take a licking against the hometown favorite, who had seemingly high potential. And Perry did take one hell of a beating until late in the second round. Out of nowhere, he managed to find this Hail Mary Anaconda choke. It was a pretty epic moment and a huge comeback underdog win. And I've kind of kept my eyes on Perry since, purely because I found his resilience and, I guess, wherewithal amidst the beating very, very impressive. And then he fought Marcel McCain a few months later on, and like one of those Uriah Faber A1 cards. And he went viral among MMA Twitter and beyond, I guess, for suffering a ridiculously brutal broken nose. Now that I've said that, you probably know exactly who I'm talking about. That's who Blake Perry is. He's one hell of a tough bastard. He still wanted to go out into the second round with his nose completely mangled. His corner were trying to push it back into place. It was a pretty gnarly scene. My entire experience with Nakagawa, on the other hand, have been his 2 losses in Cage Warriors. He's an okay fighter, decent grappling game, trains at 10th Planet. Again, I don't know enough about him stylistically to kind of call this in his favor, I guess. So this is another one of those who the fuck knows. But Blake Perry is clearly a tough out with a lot of heart, and I'd like to see him get the win here. And if he does, it'll probably be another headline catcher. I mean, it seems the guy's incapable of having just a normal fight. All right, guys, final fight. Alberto Romo versus Alex Trinidad. This is straight up a meme fight, another obscenely hilarious facet to this card, and I can break down why right now. So Alberto Romo is 4-0 as a pro. Pretty cool, right? You're probably thinking this guy's a cool prospect, 4-0. Let's see what he can do. Except he went 5-10 as an amateur and had an 8-fight losing streak, which he eventually snapped against a 0-0 fighter. But Chris, you might say, he's improved. Amateur and pro MMA are completely different games, and to which I say, sure. But then you look at his 4-0 record, and you see that his couple of latest wins have been flagged for potential issues of legitimacy, as he beat 2 guys who are 0-0 and who apparently don't exist. I've never seen him fight, but now I need to see him fight. I don't need anything else in life other than to see this man fight a real fight. 5-10 as an amateur. 8-fight losing streak, beating people who are 0-0, being flagged for a lack of legitimacy. This is peak MMA. And yeah, I just can't wait to see this fight. It does get even goofier. If you liked the Brutal Noodle as a nickname earlier in the pod, I raise you Alex Trinidad's nickname. He is the Ice Cream Man. I have many, many questions, and I probably don't wish to have them answered, to be honest. So, we've got the Ice Cream Man, we've got the Brutal Noodle, got a bunch of characters on this card, if anything. Trinidad has gotten absolutely battered in his last two Cage Warriors fights. He's been choked out twice. I couldn't even remember him until I did some kind of light brushing up on his background prior to recording this. So, fair to say he's left no real impression on me, other than the fact that he probably isn't very good at fighting. However, he at least has a legitimate record and has definitely fought people who exist. So this is one of those instances where looking at records on face value probably won't help you in picking a fight. At 5-4, Trinidad to me is probably a safer pick than the 4-0 Romo. Uh, God bless the California MMA scene. Overall, this card is kind of a straight up fun time if you're into laughing at the absurdities of regional MMA. Got forged records, awful nicknames, lopsided matchmaking, anything that you can really come to expect from the great sport of mixed martial arts. But there are some cool prospects. Damon Wilson, Roberto Hernandez. If you're going to tune in, keep an eye on those guys. Wilson Hayes is almost fun if you like your aging bruisers, like I like to call them, and your old Brazilian dudes. So Wilson Hayes definitely someone to watch here as well. Other than that, this card is completely forgettable. In all seriousness, it's definitely a little disappointing that this is Cage Warriors' return to action in 2023. But if you've seen the snapshot of the cards that they're going to be doing this year across the globe, they're going to France, they're doing Italy again. 2023 is going to be a really strong year for Cage Warriors, and we know that the cards right after this one are absolutely immense. So we've got the London card, which is going to be great. There's a Manchester card coming up. There's a Dublin card as well. They're all going to have title fights on them. Hardwick's fighting, George Hardwick's fighting. Sorry, just making it clear. I don't know if Harry's fighting as well. A bunch of like the really cool Cage Warriors prospects and fighters are fighting. Jordan Vucenic is coming back. Morgan Shahier is fighting as well. So there's definitely stuff to look forward to in 2023. I just don't know that this card kind of fits into that. It feels a bit weird. Only 7 fights. But let's just move away from that and let's kind of wrap up here. So you should probably kind of follow the podcast now, wherever you're listening to it, and leave a review if you can. I just wasted all my energy talking about this card and you just wasted all your time listening to it. So, let's help each other here. God bless your soul if you listen to this. Just a quick one. March is going to be a pretty weird month. There's a lot of Cage Warriors events. I'm going to cover all of them to the best of my ability, but I am going to be in Japan for 2 weeks. So I'm actually going to be watching K Festa over there as well, the K1 card. So very, very excited for that. But what we will have this month is we're going to have a Christian Leroy Duncan fighter breakdown before he makes his UFC debut. And then we're going to break down all the cards in March and recap all of the cards in March. So, all jokes aside, definitely give it a follow. If you're interested in UK MMA, you're interested in the Cage Warrior scene, I'm definitely the guy to follow because I'll be covering it all. So again, thank you everyone for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.